Hello, ghoulish gays. It is June, it is Pride Month, and I've been reading a lot, as I always do, because I'm smarter than you. And it is time for another monthly reading recap, this time for the month of May. I don't know what else to say for an intro, so let's get into some books. I mentioned this first one in my last video because I was trying to finish it by the end of April, but that didn't happen. I finished it at the beginning of May. The Fervor by Alma Katsu. This was my first Alma Katsu book. I do have a couple of her other ones on my shelf behind me, but I haven't gotten around to them yet. So this is a historical horror novel that is set during World War II, and it's centered around the Japanese internment camps. I thought that sounded like a pretty awesome premise for a horror novel. I think some of the best horror comes from real-life atrocities, and while I really enjoyed the first 2/3 or so of this book, it really did not stick the landing, unfortunately. I did read the afterword, in which Almakatsu states that this is pretty much a political piece that is directly about the wave of anti-Asian hate that we are experiencing in the United States currently. And I think that's absolutely a beautiful thing to write about in horror fiction. I have no issues with her choosing to write a book about that. My issue is the delivery and the fact that it kind of spits in the face of what it has to say about systemic oppression when it gets into the end of the book. The last few pages are incredibly preachy, and again, I don't have an issue with what it's preaching, just how it does it. It does kind of feel like the book just stops so that the author can sort of lecture you. And I never like that. Like I said, though, I did enjoy the majority of this book. It just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth because of how messy the ending is, because of how it doesn't tie up its themes in a satisfactory way, and like I said, kind of spits in the face of what it's trying to say with how it wraps up. I would still say it's worth a read. It was enjoyable. It's written in a very utilitarian way. It does read more like a thriller than a horror, although there are supernatural elements to it, and it delves into Japanese folklore. It was a pretty breezy read, but yeah, it really sadly cannot rank up with some of my favorites I've read this year because of just that really rough third act. Next up, we have quite a doozy with Dead Inside by Chandler Morrison. This is a novella that has gained quite a bit of infamy online, especially in extreme horror circles, and this is most definitely extreme horror. I'm going to do my best to describe this book in a way that's YouTube friendly. It is about a security guard who works the night shift at a hospital, which gives him access to the morgue, which is something that he would like very much because of his taste in women. Hopefully you can put the pieces together from that, but that's honestly not even where the really rough stuff comes in. What really puts this over the edge is when he meets the head maternity doctor, who has her own depraved desires. It is a pretty fascinating study on depravity and the mind of a necrophile, and don't really know if there's a word for what the other person is, but she is probably even more depraved than he is. To try to say whether or not I liked Dead Inside is a Herculean task. Did I enjoy myself while I was reading it? Not particularly. It was really rough. It was really hard to get through. But I do think it was well written. I do think that it has something to say about feeling on the outside of society and just feeling like you're never gonna understand normalcy. So there is something to it. It is not just shocking to be shocking, although I don't think there's anything wrong with that, even if it was. What really enabled me to be able to stomach it to the end, and this is not a long book, but it is an exhausting read, was the writing. Even though it is absolutely extreme horror, the content, what Chandler Morrison is writing about here is most definitely extreme. It is honestly more of a dark comedy than anything, though. It ends on a fabulous punchline, almost. I really did love how this book ends. It is very, very funny, and there were lines in here that did make me laugh out loud. It's a lot to do with people reacting to things in a very nonchalant way when any sane person would be sickened. I can't in good conscience recommend this. I'm not gonna be telling everyone in my life to go read it. There's a select few that I do want to read it because I think they will like it and appreciate it, but do just know your own tastes. Do I like it? Yes, on the whole. Do I recommend it? No. To borrow a quote from Typical Books, if you're the kind of person who needs trigger warnings, this book is not for you. And I don't mean that in a screw you snowflake kind of way. I absolutely respect that people have their limits and that people have their boundaries and that triggering content is absolutely a thing. I do seek this kind of thing out. I like testing my limits. I like transgressive fiction and stuff that pushes boundaries. And this is most definitely that. It's certainly one of the most extreme things I have ever read, although that list is not very long right now. So yeah, Dead Inside. I'm like the last person to talk about this on BookTube, but I'm glad I read it, even if it was a really rough time. Yeah, Dead Inside. To my great, great shame, I had never read a Stephen King book before Pet Sematary. I'm sure this book needs no introduction. I'm probably the last person alive in the year of our Lord 2022 who did not read it until now. And I'm sorry to disappoint the Stephen King haters out there, but I think it's a masterpiece. I really do. Just everything about this book works. The story progresses in a way that makes so much emotional sense and thematic sense. I could see it being called predictable, but that's kind of just because there's only one way to tell this story in the best way possible, and it's the way it's told. Which is also why the 2019, or whenever it came out, remake of the movie failed miserably. This is just one of the most impactful books about death I have ever read, and specifically child mortality and how children learn to cope with death. A lot of people call it the scariest book Stephen King has ever written, and one of just the scariest books ever written, and I absolutely agree, but I think that's a bit of a misleading way to sell it, because it is terrifying, but it is existentially terrifying. It's not gore and ghosts and stuff like that. It is confronting death for 400 pages, which is just an inherently terrifying thing to do. So I absolutely adored it. I really enjoyed the 80s film adaptation. I thought it was really close to the book, a little cheesy and dated, but a really solid adaptation. As I alluded to earlier, the more recent remake is a train wreck on steroids. It's awful. Don't watch it. But as for the book, can't recommend it enough. One of my favorites I've ever read. Absolutely loved it. Next up is the one audiobook I listened to during the month of May, so I have to keep my hands occupied. So my audiobook for the month was The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling, which is a sci-fi thriller eking into horror territory. It is about a caver in the future who has taken on this kind of mysterious caving job. It centers around the caver and her handler, who she talks to only over the intercom. She is alone in the cave, or is she? And it's a really interesting character study. I will say it wasn't what I expected. It is a more slow-paced drama than anything. It is exploring the relationship between these two characters, which is very gay, which surprised me in a very pleasant way. So I really did enjoy seeing their relationship kind of evolve. They're strangers when the book starts. Really well done character development, I have to say, too. Their motivations and backgrounds are maybe a little bit cliched, but they are characters that you care about. Even when they are infuriating, there were times that specifically the caver just made decisions or was so quick to disobey her handler just out of a power play, I guess, that just infuriated me. There are so many times where she could have died because she didn't follow instructions, and I found that really frustrating. I think it's sort of intentional. It is sort of a realistic character study of a person in a crisis situation. The sci-fi elements are minimal, the horror elements are pretty minimal until it gets into the climax, which I thought was really kind of hauntingly beautiful. It's not at all what I expected, and I really liked how things in the cave ended up. I really enjoyed it. It's not one of my favorite books ever, but it was a good, entertaining sci-fi character drama. Reminded me a lot of the films of Alex Garland. Probably my favorite aspect of my experience with the book was the narrator. Adenrele Ojo, I believe is her name, and she has a lovely voice to listen to. It's very soothing. She has a lot of variety, so you can always tell who's talking. She changes the voice up a lot, but it's not like cheesy or overacted. Definitely, of all the audiobooks that I have listened to so far, easily my favorite narration. I still really enjoyed it, and if it sounds like your cup of tea, I think you would enjoy it too, so check out The Luminous Dead. As much as I love horror, I am kind of trying to make an effort to read some non-horror books. So for May, I decided to try out a very popular book, The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, which is a novelistic retelling of the story of Achilles, not just at the Battle of Troy. It follows pretty much his whole life and really focuses on the love story between him and Patroclus. So it is an incredibly gay book. I was pretty convinced this would not be my thing. I don't really know what it was that got me to give it a try. I do like the classics. I like stuff like the Odyssey. I have never actually read the Iliad, but I do want to after reading this. I was just a little concerned that it would be not very good, since it does tend to get lumped in with the other book talk favorites like Colleen Hoover, and a lot of stuff that tends to, I think, be very popular but not very good. But I am pleased to say that this is a beautiful novel and just one of my favorites I've read this year. I loved it. I got so sucked into this incredibly romantic and devastating story. God, is it so romantic. I think if you're worried that it will read like YA or like kind of gimmicky, I did not find that at all. It's written with so much poetry and just very swooning romantic stuff here. That's just the one word that I keep returning to, is romantic. Sometimes I feel that I don't have a heart. I don't tend to care what happens to people in splatterpunk books because I know they're gonna die anyways in very horrific ways, so I don't get attached to them or their relationships. So it was a good reminder that I do in fact have a heart. Yeah, I can't recommend this enough. It's beautiful. It's a fast-paced book, even though there's, quite a bit of emphasis put on the romance and on the smaller moments between these characters. The story itself always feels like it's moving along quite a bit. It is from the perspective of Patroclus, which I think is the only way to do this right. Seeing Achilles from a secondary perspective, someone who admires him as just this, God among men, is the right way to go, I think. Everything about this worked for me. There's not one thing I would change. I loved it so deeply. I really want to read Circe, also by Madeline Miller. I don't think it'll be quite as up my alley as this, just because it's not gay. This is a beautiful novel that I would recommend to absolutely everyone, except homophobes, but I wouldn't talk to them anyways, so yeah, Song of Achilles, A+, 5-star book. Alright, Splatterpunk coming back in hot with Castaways by Brian Keene. This is my first Brian Keene novel, and I would describe it as Jack Ketchum does MILF Island. So it's about a Survivor-type TV show called Castaways, and it's about these people on an island. A storm comes in, they lose contact with the producers and everything, and so it's kind of every man for himself. And there are, of course, some cryptids on this island that want to hunt them and kill them and do other horrible things to them. I did like it. It felt in a lot of ways like a poor man's version of Off Season by Jack Ketchum. Like most splatterpunk, it delivers what it promises, and if what it promises sounds like fun to you, then you're not gonna hate it. It isn't exactly, best horror fiction ever, at least to me. I don't know, maybe this would be somebody's favorite book, but yeah, it's fine. I enjoyed it. It does lean a little heavy on the sexual assault and just how a lot of the characters talk about women. It's very hard to stomach. Does make it a lot more satisfying when they get torn apart by these cryptids. But yeah, there is some stuff in there that I was like, really? Like, did we have to do that? However, there is one character in here that I thought was so much fun. He's kind of like a foul-mouthed mechanic that you kind of think is going to be one of the characters that you want to die pretty quickly. He's a bit of a hard pill to swallow, but by the end, he became my favorite character, and I really wanted to see him make it through alive. Definitely my favorite thing about this book, I'd actually have to say, although the gore is pretty fun, and it has a climax that is really page-turning, really exciting stuff. There's nothing in here that's gonna surprise you. It's serviceable, does what it's supposed to do, enjoyed it. Yeah. Now, I like to think that I am someone who tries to diversify my tastes. I try to challenge myself with reading, but sometimes I just need to indulge in my most lowbrow of delights. And so I read Bigfoot Crank Stomp by Eric Williams. In order to sell this book, I am going to read you the tagline from the back. Bigfoot is real, and he's addicted to meth. That is what this book promises. That is what you get. The very first chapter, there is Bigfoot, there is Crank, and there is stomping people's heads into mush. So, how do you review something like this as, like, a work of literature? Say what you will about the prose, about the numerous typos, the morality of some of the pretty nasty stuff that happens in here, but what you absolutely cannot say about this book is that it doesn't deliver what it promises. It wears its heart on its sleeve. It's nasty, blood-spurting Bigfoot heart that's covered in meth. I think you can probably guess that as I'm someone who saw the title, saw the cover, read the tagline, and ordered the book and read it, I liked it very much. If you think it sounds dumb, you're gonna think it's dumb. If you can't stomach some extreme stuff, then do not read it. This comes from Deadite Press. I really love them. They do kind of specialize in cult horror fiction and stuff like this. A lot of it is very extreme, very transgressive. If you visit their website, you'll get a good sense of the kind of stuff that they publish and whether it's going to be for you or not. It is very much for me. This is not my favorite book I've ever read, but I read it on vacation in a couple days, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. So that's it for everything I read in May, so I do want to kind of briefly go through my TBR for June. I don't know that I'll be able to finish all of these books. I am going with entirely queer horror, or horror by queer authors. So a lot of stuff I'm really excited to read, some stuff that's been on my shelf for a while that I'm excited to finally get around to. First, the one that I'm about a third of the way through is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I don't know that Paul Tremblay himself is gay, but this does center a queer couple and their daughter. I also want to read You've Lost a Lot of Blood by Eric LaRocca, which I do want to briefly just bask in the beauty of that cover. Oh my goodness. I'm very excited for this. I really want to read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, but it is currently unavailable because it's being sort of republished by a bigger publisher, so for the time being it is out of print. I also got a short story collection by Poppy Z. Bright, who now goes by Billy Martin, I believe. So this is a short story collection, Wormwood, formerly titled Swamp Fetus, so sounds like a lot of fun. I've not read any Poppy Z. Bright before, but I have always wanted to, so. I also want to read a pretty new book that I think everyone's going to be reading this month, Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin, which, again, beautiful cover. I love that. I love a good transgressive work that makes TERFs mad. It seems like they really hate this one, so if anything, that means I'm going to really enjoy it. Red X by David Demchuk. which is kind of a mix of fiction, historical fiction, and memoir, from what I understand. It is about disappearances of gay men in Toronto in, I believe, the 80s. I am excited to read this, while also simultaneously terrified to read it. And finally, I've been really wanting to read this author. I do have 2 of his books, and I should start with the other one because it came first and I think people like it a bit more, but since it's Pride Month, I'm gonna read Echo by Thomas Old Hoyvelt. Hoyvelt, I don't know how to pronounce it. There's mountaineering, there's a possible possession, I believe. I really don't know much about it, and I'm trying to keep it that way. Really happy to just even have this on my shelf. It's so beautiful, and hopefully the book itself is as beautiful as the presentation. I think that's all I have to say for today, so, bye!